Great.
All right, you're on. Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Okay, thank you, Mark. And Wayne, you're with us too, and as chair of the commission, you have anything you want to say at the beginning here?
So Wayne is not here.
Oh, Wayne's not here. Okay.
No, he and I are flying to DC today to go to the Department of Education meetings for our re-recognition. So he was going to try to get on, but he had a lot to get done before he was leaving because Jaco showed up last week at his hospital.
Oh boy. Okay. And Bob McGeaney, where's he?
Yes, I'm here.
You're on phone. Okay. All right.
Yep.
And I'm sorry, but I can see your name here, but what's your first name? And Enefstead, is it?
Oh, Eric, E-R-I-C is my first name.
Right. I used to be Sister Eric Marie. Okay.
Mm.
All right. So I know that then. All right. So welcome, fellas. I'm glad we're all here. And I hope that we can have a very profitable but interactive hour. Whatever will be helpful to you. You all got the materials, right? Good. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So how long have you all been on accreditation, or what have you done with accreditation already? I just want to, we're not starting from scratch. I know that. Eric, Mark, Bob.
Sure. This is Eric here. I served 2 3-year terms on accreditation in the Pacific region.
Okay.
That's sort of been my experience, and then I've also been through a couple of 10-year reviews,
Okay.
and 5-year reviews.
Okay. All right. Great. And Mark?
Well, I'm probably the least likely person to be in this slot. I've served on several accreditation reviews over 34 years, so going all the way back to 1990, I guess, not quite 34. But I'm just an old white guy trying to be useful.
Okay. Hey, that's important. We need more of you around. And Bob?
Bob, and then 6 years.
I'm having trouble hearing Bob. Anybody else? Yeah. Are you there, Bob?
Yeah, he just got disconnected, so
Oh, okay.
he'll probably rejoin.
Okay. All right. Great. Okie doke. Well, when Wayne asked me if I would do this, I like accreditation work. I know some people don't, but I really do, because it gives me ideas that I take back and try at our place. And it's a wonderful way to get new ideas and so on. So that's my like. The reason you have what I sent you as the working pages of a workbook is when we went to National Site Team Chairs some years ago, I combed through everything I was supposed to know and do and pay attention to, and I thought, I have got to get this in a manageable way so that when I get to place that I can do that, because I can't keep all that in my head once you hit the place. It's sort of like everything you do in a CPE unit, but you can't just go in and fly even after years of experience. So that's the place where my working pages came from. So it's kind of a workbook. But there's a couple of things that I'd like to walk through it with you. This by no means says you have to use this kind of thing. I do think it is fair to the materials that we have, and especially the National Site Team Chair Manual. That's just very, very good. And that's assumed that we go by that. I just tried to take it apart so I could put it together and use it on site. So let's just start through the whole thing. And on the first page, I'm going to call attention to some things. Down there, about halfway down the page, it says the National Site Team Chair Manual is a major resource. I just said that. But the next two things are somewhat outdated. And Wayne and I had a conversation about this about a week ago. And I said, Wayne, I think my opinion is they either need to be updated or they need to be pulled from the website. But because some of them have incorrect information as the National Site Team Chair situation has evolved. Now, he was going to take that to the commission. So I have no, we have no jurisdiction over that. So the commission will discuss and decide about that. But those are somewhat outdated. So they are PowerPoints. They do have some good information. But I would say go to your Bible, which is the Site Team Chair Manual, dated 2016. And then there is another one that just came out this year, this Preceptor Mentor Orientation. And nobody told me that we needed to look at this, but it is important, I think, if we have preceptors, as we do at many centers, or if people have clinical placements and so on, there are things that these people should know. And so therefore, it's kind of important that we look at that resource and at least ask about it. It's not on Appendix 5, but it is a piece of the training, so might want to take care of that.
Barbara?
Uh-huh.
Question, if I may.
Yeah.
I know this sounds kind of basic, but where is the site team manager?
Oh, I'm glad you asked, and I'm glad that Mark Medwed is with us. You go to the ACPE website, and then you go to the ACPE Exchange. If you go
to the Exchange.
Yeah, to the Exchange. And in the resource library and or under National Site Teams, you'll find it. It's a bit of a hunt. I would like it to be a little bit closer to the surface, but I'm not into changing websites either. So does that make sense to you, Eric?
It does. I kind of, since it's been, what is it, a year since I've been off, I kind of forgot about the
Yeah.
the Exchange.
Yeah. And I put that up at the top for the, a note for the rest of these resources. Do it this way. That'll help you out there. The other pieces that I listed there is in that same general section, you're going to find the Accreditation Appendices. And there are a number of them that are important for accreditation visits. I listed them there. There might be some others that you might want to add. Again, I sent this to you in Word, so you can feel free to edit it, commit it to file 13, or use it as is. You've got all those options and probably a few more. On the bottom of that page, I just want to say, find out early on how the center organizes its student records. The reason I say that is the recommendation is that we look at 20% of the records of the last 10 years. Now, people organize their files either alphabetically by participants, or they organize them by the group. Like it was the summer interns, it was 2017, it was the residents 2016, 17, and that kind of thing. Either way works. People probably have preferences, but we're not into reorganizing people's files. We use them as they are. But if you're going to do, here's a hint, if you've got them organized by groups, well, figure out, because you can get a list from ACPE, and they do it almost by turnaround, of all the enrollees in that particular program that you're going to visit between whatever dates you need. And they'll spend your spreadsheet. And because it's a spreadsheet, you can also manipulate your data. So that's helpful.
Great. Question about that, if I may.
Uh-huh.
Is that something you're sort of recommending, that we ask the National ACPE office to do a printout for the, of all the supervisors and students for a 10-year period?
I do, and here's the reason. If the records are arranged by alphabet, you can go through your alphabetical, you can organize your spreadsheet by alphabet, and you can figure out whose you want to look at. Otherwise, you can get 3 drawers of files or 2 drawers of files, and I think we've got 3, and you don't know who was in there when. So that's if they're alphabetically arranged. If they're arranged by group, you don't want to look at all of the residents for 1 year and then miss 3 other units. So what I usually do if they're organized by group is I don't pay too much attention to my spreadsheet that came from ACPE, but I usually suggest to the person who's looking at records, let's take the first file out of this particular group, the second file out of the next one, the third file out of the third group, however many groups we have over 10 years. That way you're getting a random sample.
Okay.
But I also know, because of my spreadsheet, I know what my total number of students is, or units. And you know, you don't always, if somebody does 4 units of a residency, are they down there 4 times? Well, you don't want to look at all 4 of theirs and then say, well, that's fine for the records. All I'm saying is it's one of those things to look at. So
Okay.
Does that answer that, Eric?
It did, and I've got a follow-up question, if I may, about
Okay,
this.
sure.
It seems like this is kind of a new tool for us for accreditation to get a list of all the students
Mm-hmm.
who have been in the program for 10 years because of the electronic
Right,
storage, right?
right.
So we would go to Mark. Is that right? Go to Mark and say, Mark, I'm going to be doing a 10-year review at this center. Can you give me this list? That's something you can create, Mark?
Yeah, very easily.
Okay.
Usually I can do it with 5 minutes, but if we're busy or out of the office, it could, you know, if you give me 24 to 48 hours, for sure you'll have it. It's a spreadsheet. You can manipulate it. You can sort it any way you want to. And
Okay.
And just while we're talking about this, this is something for us to say to the people in our regions who are coming up for 10-year visits. That is your best way to do this, rather than going back. Well, it's a good thing you can check your records against the ACPE record. That's one thing. But otherwise, let them know that they can get this. And I have a question for Mark Medwed. Mark, when you send that out, I requested one for a place in Fort Wayne, and it didn't include gender, and it didn't include religion, which I thought were, aren't those still on? Don't we still enter those things?
the student enters those things into the database now. It's an IQA, it's a query that we run, so that's not included in the query. So if you want those items, we can have the query.
Okay.
Not necessary. I think it's just we can give you the information. Units.
But that is really a good way and an easy way for centers to look at their students over a 10-year period, and it saves them a lot of time. Now we're talking about it from a little bit different, about how do I get to 20% of the records that I should be looking at. Like if we had, let's suppose they had 200 units in 10 years, well then I should be looking at 40 records. So.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
And centers can get that information for themselves by going into their centers into their MyACPE. So they wouldn't call us for that, but you can't get in other centers, which is why you would be in touch with them if you drop an email.
Yeah.
So Barbara, are you saying having the faith group and gender would be an important piece for that?
I think it would be helpful, but I don't know if it's important. I don't know if it's essential.
So let me see. I'll see what it would take to add to it, because we don't create those, but I can see.
Yeah, and I tend to be the big picture person, and so I tend to like the data, but not everybody does. So then another.
Great. Well, one sort of comment about that. It seems that moving forward is probably, because it feels like a bit of a change in the way, at least I've been doing accreditation visits, to let the center know that one of the things we will be doing is we can download from the national office, or we can ask the national office to print off all their students for the past 10 years.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm gonna, if I'm a national site team chair, I'm not gonna tell the group that I'm not gonna tell the center I'm doing that. They can get their information. I'm trying to figure out how many records do I have to look at over 10 years. You know, it's not to hold the material or the information and not be transparent, but I don't think that's really the site team chair doesn't do that kind of thing. Your regional chair would be the person who's working more closely with the center until you arrive. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'll say keep pondering. It seems to me important saying this is something that we're doing as we look at the center for transparency, and to say,
well,
because it's sort of opening up a new door that we haven't been using before.
Okay, well, I think about that, but let's move on if we can. A question.
Barbara, before we move on,
Sure.
will you tell us one more time? I have the website up now, but how do we access the manual?
Okay, where you're going to look is go to the ACP Exchange. Now, your best way maybe to get there is go through accreditation. And it says there's a link there that takes you to the ACPE Exchange.
Toward the bottom of the page.
Yeah.
At least it's mine. It's at the,
Yeah.
It's not the bottom, very close to the bottom.
Find it, Mark?
Yeah, it's the very bottom of this. If you scroll all the way to the bottom, it says additional information and resources.
Yeah, I see it.
Yeah, mine is blue.
Okay, and then you go, so that takes you to the ACPE Exchange. And on the right-hand side, you have a long column of things. Among them, somewhere down toward the bottom, I believe you will find National Site Teams.
Yeah, there's a folder for National Site Team.
Mm-hmm.
So if there are other documents that you're interested in having, we can also put other documents there. So.
Okay, sorry, my computer's slow.
Okay.
Pulling these pages up, but you can go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. One of the questions that comes up sometimes is, are these meetings that we're going to do on site, is the supervisor there? Not usually, unless we're meeting with the supervisor. I know that's a certified educator now, so bear with me. We're probably going to be supervisors throughout this. I haven't quite got my brain converted. But we meet with, like when you meet with the PCC or the PAG or whatever they call their advisory group, it's often over lunch. But when the meeting begins, or when you start talking about the program and that, the supervisors usually excuse themselves. They're not there when you're meeting with the students and with the alumni and so on. So it's not, again, and that's all written in the thing. I mean, but sometimes people ask that question. And usually, if people have been through this, they understand that. Sometimes you have to just kind of tell them that, well, we met with you, we're going to meet with these other people. So, okay. I have at one point, I haven't heard it in a number of years, but apparently in some region or some geographic area of the United States, there had been a discussion about whether we could accept a dinner from the host place where we're visiting. And they said that, you know, they had thought about that as a conflict or going over a boundary or something like that. It was a new question for me. I've not heard that brought up in the last 4 or 5 years. I never heard it brought up in any training for National Site Team chairs. And I can tell you that at most places, they're going to invite you to dinner. And usually, here's a hint. They may want to be very gracious, and so they want to invite you to the first night that you're there, and then you're going to be overnight, let's say 2 nights. And so they want to invite you the second night. Well, the first night's fine because you'd like to really meet with the supervisors, not with everybody else. It's not a huge group. It's a working dinner. They'll treat you well, but it is a working dinner. So you want to kind of get yourself straightened out for the next day. What are we really looking at? What does the supervisor want us to look at? What are the concerns they have? What questions do we have from reading through the materials that if they could just tell us that evening, it would make more sense to us, but we weren't clear about what it when we read something. Those kinds of things. So that happens that first night. So it's not a real good thing to have 6 people there plus the site team. I mean, it's that big of a place. Okay. Now, before I answer a question, I want to go to the second night. The second night, you can accept a dinner invitation, and it can be a lot of fun. But, you know, you might be sitting there thinking, oh, my gosh, we got a lot of work to do before we go to bed tonight. So just be aware of that. Sometimes, if you're there, it's the night before your exit report, the site team may want to go to a meal together and make it a working meal. That's a choice. There's no right or wrong. But anyway, okay, so Eric, what's your question?
Yeah, I've got a couple of things. So back just one step about the supervisor meeting, the center educator, not meeting with students, not meeting with the alumni, they're not in the PAG meeting.
Right.
What about the meeting with administrators?
Not usually, no.
Not usually. Interesting. In many situations they have been.
They introduce you, and they have told their administrators that this group will be meeting with them, and then they excuse themselves. Okay.
All right. Thank you. That's interesting. Because I think I've been in visits where it's been both, right? Where the supervisor does sit in that meeting as well.
Yeah. And
so that's one question. The other one is about, this is sort of a comment, and I just want to clarify. Yeah, in my experience, I think in the Pacific region, what we did was the first night dinner was with the center's supervisor and the supervisors, and that was paid for by the region. So we, like whoever was the regional representative, paid for that dinner.
Okay.
And then the second night was sometimes then hosted by the center, and they could invite whoever they wanted to that meeting.
Okay. My point, I'm not getting into the expense or who pays for it. I was just simply talking about your workload.
Yeah, okay, I can hear that, but I was like, as we move into the kind of this national structure, that question about who pays for it, and who hosts, it seems like an important clarification to have.
Okay, yeah.
Mark?
I mean, right now, whatever budget is set aside from the regions for the remainder of this year stays. So if the region's been doing something, continue. What we're going to be doing from the commission level and from the finance committee is putting together who's going to pay for what and how some of those things are covered, because one region charges for this, one other region doesn't charge for this, and it's all, it's across the board. So there's a comprehensive thing being put out that will be for 2018, but in business as usual, because the regions allocated their funds already for the year based on everything coming up. So there should be no concern about continuing the practice as it's been through December.
Okay. Just quickly, if that's a problem, then being provided lunch by the center, breakfast, all of the other stuff is a conflict of interest as well. So
yeah,
just a personal opinion that once you get into cutting out all of those meals, well then, we're a voluntary organization. I think I'd be upset if somebody sent me a gift or made a contribution to my organization, but the rest of it I think is necessary. Somebody's got to pay for that stuff. Right. I'm not going to be a site team chair if you make me pay for all my meals.
No, of course not. I don't think there's any conflict with them taking care of that, because it's part of the visit. I mean, you just provide food for folks while they're working.
Right.
So if they're taking you to a lavish meal because that's what they want to do, there's nothing more going to come of it. I mean, so they're feeding you a steak versus a hamburger. I mean, it's not going to be anything different. It's the food, and I think Barbara's point was more your time. And if you want to go out and have a meal, or they arrange for you to get working or something quicker.
Great. Sounds good. So I think one last question about that, and thanks for your patience with me. Since I'll be doing these in a region outside of the Pacific region, it's probably advisable to talk to the chair of the region then about what their usual practice is about these meals. Is that the right way to approach this?
This is Wayne. I've been on for about 10 minutes, but you've all been talking really right along. I think that's a good idea, just to check in with the regional chair about any details related to the site visit. I do think in the end, all of the meals really should be the expense of the center. But yeah, check in with the site team chair. I mean, the regional chair.
Great, thank you.
On page 2, and we're not going to go as detailed through all, there are a couple of big things here that need to be thought through by the National Site Team Chair. As we have a clinical member on a practicing chaplain and so on the team, that has been a great gift. It has also meant a shift in some other things. So number one, you want to know when you find out who your practitioner is, what's that person's experience? They may have, usually they're chaplains, and so they know a lot about the clinical place. They're going to know a lot about students. They make sense with alumni. When it comes to some other things like looking at documentation and so on, that's not their expertise. So you're going to have to figure out, what the person's background is, get them oriented. Sometimes they feel very much like a fish out of water, and the last thing you want is, a team of 3 people, which is really a 2 and 1. I've worked with some wonderful clinical people, but you do need to know what they're doing, how they feel about this, and get them involved. So here's a couple of thoughts. They work, nobody dictated them, they're not written anywhere. This person is very good to be the person who takes the lead when you meet with the students. Although you want some input from the supervisors too. This person can be a good lead to meet with alumni. This person can even be the one who is a great person to walk through the facilities or facility that you're at. But you'll have to decide how you're going to do this. And what happens here is usually you cannot have the entire site team doing everything together as a group. You're going to have to split up in order to get the work done. Because we have tried to shorten the site visits. We have changed the composition of the site visit team for good reasons. But it also means that the other people then have to do some other things. And you just have to figure out what you want to do about that. And that's not the kind of thing you want to talk about when you all meet on site, or even before you meet when you have a phone call. So think about that. What would you do? And it depends on your site. I've had people, I was chair for Emory, which was, that was a challenge. But what we did when we did student record documentation, all the supervisors worked on those. We had a bigger team than usual, and we got our clinician, our clinical person, to be the one who kept straight who was working on which drawer and where they were, and she kept us all organized. That was great. I've sent those people, I've sent maybe 2 members of the team, a supervisor and the clinical member, off to tour the building, and I've sat down and started looking at documentation. You've got to figure out what works. So, but I just advise you to think about that. And another thing that's very nice for the clinical member to do is in the site visit report number 1, and this is not written anywhere, but I've known it's to be done and it works well, is to ask that person to contribute a paragraph about, from the clinical member's perspective, how does she see or he see the center? A nice piece. Talking about getting, even before you meet, you're going to be thinking about the site reports you have to write. I'm not going to take responsibility to write every piece of a report. So I farm them out. And then, but I reserve the right to edit because people write very differently. And so you've got to have some continuity and consistency within site visit report number, part 1. Part 2 is a little bit different, but part 1. And so, you might, as you're thinking through the place where you're going to meet and think about the people you've got, how can you best use their skills, and how could you have, I think it's important that the site team chair take the lead in the meeting with the administration, because you are the official person there as chair, and that is, I think, the appropriate place. Does the chair have to be the lead person in all the groups? I never do it. I farm them out so that other people do them, and then whatever group they're in charge of, they write that piece of the report. I take notes, but I don't write that whole thing. Does that make sense to think about at least?
Yeah, I'm taking notes here. I'm not sending emails. So yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Another thing you might want to think about before you even have a conversation on the phone with your site team, you're going to have to do Appendix 5. Now, it's a little bit better since it used to be Appendix 9, I think, but it's still a mess. In my opinion. Nobody asked me for that, but that's my opinion. Anyway, if you want everybody to do that, I'd at least think about asking, as you read through the center's materials, Joe, would you look at the policies and procedures in particular and that part of Appendix 5 and tell them what pages it is that they have to look at? Get another person, and maybe it's your clinical person, or maybe it's 2 people, looking at the curriculum section. I typically take the administrative and accreditation sections of Appendix 5, so that when we come together as a group and we say, how does the center look? I'm expecting Joe to say, well, in their policies, everything looks right, excepting for this policy. I'm not sure about this one, so can we look at that? The other person says, administratively and so on, I think we're okay, accepting. I think I'm not sure they really address this and this, so we maybe want to look at that. Curriculum. So again, if you don't do that, you're responsible for the group, you're responsible for site visit report A, and you'll end up with all of Appendix 5, and your other people will go home and have a nice barbecue. And yes, you will get a stipend, but it's easier to change. It's easier to I think, to get the work put out over the whole team, because really it's a great learning experience too for people. So that's just something to think about when you think ahead to Appendix 5. Let's see. I wanted to say something here about, well, you want to find out from your site team people if there's any accommodations they need, physically, food, or whatever. Another piece, write yourself a note to take along a pad of paper and, like this. And at each meeting, be sure that you've got who's the meetings with at the top, and then you've got a line down it, and you get people's names. You pass the piece of paper around, you get their names and their titles, and then you ask them, please print. You don't want to try to figure out their handwriting. But what that's going to do is it's going to send you home with the people you met when you met with the PAG or the PCC, the students you met when they were in the units, all this kind of stuff. Stuff that if you rely upon your own brain, at least mine doesn't do that too well for when I get home. Does that make sense? Basically, you're getting a lot of survival tips, I think. Anything else about those things before we go on a little bit here? Because I really do want to get to some of the other pages, but this is all important stuff here.
Well, in
the
the last
appendix
site team visit that I did, which wasn't that long ago, we identified a need for follow-up meetings with some people. Can you talk about that a little bit?
What, could you talk about what you mean by follow-up with some people?
Well, in the last 10 minutes, an issue cracked open in the interview with students and former students.
Mm-hmm.
An issue cracked open in which ethics was brought up, and so I had a follow-up interview with that student and then with the resident group as a whole.
Right.
So
thanks for bringing that up, because that's very real and that can happen. It's one of the reasons why I have this workbook for myself, because in the middle of the day, on the full day that we're there, something like you're talking about here, Mark, turns up. And then you've got to get your group together and you've got to figure out what you're going to do. And it sounds as if you were designated to go see so-and-so and follow up on that. And maybe there was something else, or maybe we need to go back and ask somebody for something else. You need some time like that. So the schedule is tight, but there's got to be time for the team to meet together. And you just have to figure out how to do it. But thanks for bringing that up. It's a good example. Yeah. Okay, on page 3, and we're not going to go through this, but there's a really important thing at the top and the bottom that's highlighted in yellow. There's a whole list of things that it has been shown over the years that these are the places where centers sometimes get into, maybe they're not totally in compliance with the standards. And our job there is to listen to their story, help them, because we want them to be doing a good job. And between our being there with them and then our site visit report part 1, they then have 30 days to respond, and that's all consultation time. And then we do site visit report part 2. And that's where there's a recommendation that we as a team, we vote on it. And we send a recommendation to the commission. But it's really important that these are things that we look at. So I listed them there. They're in the National Site Team Chair manual on page 37. But they're just things to think about. And they're all going to show up on Appendix 5. The other thing that's important down at the bottom is there is a non-disclosure agreement, and it's in the same place on the website, that is to be signed by all the team members, and then the originals are left in the center, and the copies are, the site team chair sends the copies along with all the other material at the end of the whole process, sends those in. So again, for me to remember to get those things signed, I make it a practice of getting them signed at the very first time I meet with the rest of the team. And then I take them with me when we first go to the center, and I say to the first person I meet who could do this, administrative assistant, saying, could you please make me a copy of each of these so that I can take them with me, and I see to it that the originals stay there that day with the person in charge of the center. There are lots of other ways to do it, but that helps me remember and get the job done. So that's, you can look for those and that kind of thing.
Great. So those stay with the center.
Yes.
Do they go to the national office as well with the report?
You will send the copies. You will send the copies of them. And I think that's on the bottom of the page. No, but it does tell you that. It tells you that in the handbook. So it looks like this. It's a very short thing. It says, I understand that as a member of the ACPE accreditation process, I may have access to information from confidential student records. I will not retain copies of those records or information, nor will I disclose or use any information I might obtain from them in any process other than the one in which I am currently authorized to participate. You sign it and date it. So does the clinical member. So that's a piece to take care of.
Thank you.
One of the things that we're starting to work on and see if it's possible is to have those signed within board effect. We have a couple of centers who are doing a 10-year pilot in board effect. Forms that commissioners sign the exact same form and they do it in board effect. So we might be able to take care of that for you.
Okay.
Otherwise, you know, prepare to do it that way, but our goal is to make that electronic. So
right.
Papers
Okay.
Then just other pieces on page 4, there's some things again highlighted in yellow, that it's very important that every interview you have or every meeting you have with a group at the center, that confidentiality is addressed, that you make introductions, talk about it, confidentiality, answer questions that the interviewees may have, and then proceed to your own questions. So that should be what whomever's taking the lead for that particular group, everybody should be saying those things. They should also be saying that site team members may be taking notes to ensure an accurate report. So that's a piece of it. Now, when you get to page 5 of the material I sent you, and all the way up to page 20, and I'm going to speak.
Can I ask just?
Yep.
So these notes that are taken, they're important to take, but are they considered discoverable evidence? I mean, that would influence what I did with my notes.
No, your notes are for you. They're sort of like the notes that a supervisor or certified educator takes, but they are not part of any official file or anything like that.
Okay, thanks.
And the other thing, Mark, is you would be using those for writing your part of the report or the whole thing or whatever. And then you may find that you listened very well, but when you wrote something in the report, the center writes back and said, you didn't quite understand this. This is the way it is. Then you modify your report. That's the beauty of the consultation part that happens between the site visit and report part 1 and report part 2 and the center's response in between.
Okay.
So, yeah, we're really, it's a very collegial kind of thing. I know people's anxiety goes up, but it's basically collegial. So,
Mark, also, if you want to ensure that your notes are private, don't keep them with the other materials.
right,
Like when you go to turn them in or send them, you don't want to just make sure you keep it in a separate notebook or something.
right, yeah. Yeah, those things never go anywhere else, even to your, even to the site team chair and so on. Now,
I've got a sort of a general question, if I may,
sure.
about the notes on the report. I've done, a few. Are we looking for is there sort of a standard expectation or custom of a paragraph describing the meeting or a page describing each meeting?
A paragraph.
More like a paragraph for each meeting.
I think that's where the National Site Team Chair Manual can be very helpful, because it does say in like meetings with administrators and that you name the people and their titles and so on. But it gives you some guidelines about what to do. What I tend to do as editor of a group, of a report when I'm getting it back from other people, is I try to get some consistency and keep it down to, it's sort of like chart notes on patients. You're not trying to write a short story or a novel. You're really trying to get the gist of this and what did it say to the particular, to the purpose of the visit. And we don't attribute specific things to particular people. usually. I guess there's no, I don't know, if I just added usually because I'm thinking, well, maybe I would sometimes, but normally I wouldn't, I think. Now, I just want to say in a big leap here, between pages 5 and page 18, those are different groups that you might visit with, that you might meet with. And on each page, there are some questions that you probably want to ask. And that material comes from the manual. It's just a different way of organizing it. What I tend to do with this is when I get the schedule for whatever center it is that we're going to, they never set the schedule up the same way. No two places are going to set it up the same way because various factors come in. I simply cut and paste these things in the order in which they're going to occur, so that I'm simply working through this whole thing. And when I get finished, I've got lots of notes written on the white papers, on the white spaces here, and I can write my reports quite easily, the parts I have to do. Does that make sense?
Well, I think it's well organized. I know that I would do it a little differently, but I do like the fact that you bring a clarity of organization to what you're doing. So I appreciate that, even though I might do it a bit differently.
Absolutely, absolutely. The point is, these are things that have been suggested in the manual for site team chairs, that with these particular, if the people have these particular titles after their name, these are some of the things. Now, from having read the center's materials and having conferred with the rest of your team and having listened to the major supervisor or certified educator at that center, and having had the other meetings you've had before you come to this one, whatever that is, you're going to have some other questions you want to ask. And you may, those are the kinds of things that you and the team members want to talk about. What do we really want to focus on? Or, Mark, as you brought up, when you ran into this piece that had something to do with ethics and a student, you probably ran into something that might have impacted or influenced questions that you might have asked elsewhere and beyond that. So that's the point of it. Now, let's go back to page 19. You've gotten through the site visit. You're going to write the interview, the material for the exit interview. This is not the total report. The basic thing here that you're going to do is what's written there with those 4 bullets. A summary of findings. Everybody at the center wants to know, are there things that you found that we need to address? That's not why we're there, but it is a piece of it. Then, what are the center's strengths and limitations? I prefer to call them challenges. The language in the manual is limitations. Recommendations for development and improvement. These are recommendations. These are not matters of compliance and non-compliance. And you got to be ready to know that because I make a recommendation and you're the persons at the center, you may decide you want to do that because it doesn't make sense for X, Y, and Z reasons. Okay, that's, Then any concerns that are going to be included in Site Team Report Part 1. So when you and I, as a site team, or when you as a chair and 2 other people as the site team members, when you leave the particular CPE center, the center should know what is going to be in that Part 1 report. There should not be surprises. What you're going to add in Part 1 of the site visit report, you're going to add the accreditation history, all the people you met with, all those kinds of things. But really, the center knows, and they have a pretty good, it's not the final thing yet. And the nice thing about it is, The site team has 14 days to get this back to the center, the report. After they leave, they have 14 days, and that's calendar days, not work days. So, and then the center has 30 days to respond. So really, when you leave, when you and I leave that center, they have 44 days to respond because they already know what we're going to say, what's going to be written, because we've told them. And then the last page, on page 20, I do want to bring this up. Again, what's in red is my practice. It is not in the manual. Most of this is not in the manual. But the timeline is. And the timeline is to be respected. So I put in here, and I talk about this when we have our first meeting by phone. And by the way, if you want to do that, if you contact Mark Medwed at ACPE and ask them to set up a conference phone, and you tell them how many people it's for, he'll do it. And so that's a really great thing that we can do. So anyway, I put down there the date. I figure out 14 days from our leaving, and by that date, we have to have our report back. Then I back up from that. If that's going to be the case, then by such and such a date, each of us has our separate pieces of the report to all of us. So whatever you write, whichever sections you were responsible for, you send it to all of us. And then by the next date that's down there, the chair, that's going to be you, will send a draft of the entire report to all of us for review and turn around by end of work day on such and such. This is tight. And then by such and such a date, and that's at 14 days, the chair will do any final edits and send the report to center, site team members, and regional chair. And the center has 30 days to reply, which at the outside would mean, now they could do it earlier, most of the time they don't, but this is important that your group knows, your team knows when they have to have room on their calendars to get this stuff done, when they're going to get this back. And then you have 14 more days at the outside, and we could be earlier. And what that includes. So I try to give those dates to people and say, look, please put this on your calendar and know that you're going to have to be available on those days to do this work. It's part of the process. And then after all of that, there is an evaluation. And this is also on that ACPE exchange. There's an evaluation of site team members and of the site team chair. And those forms are there, and they tell you what to do with them. They tell you where to send them, to go to 2 different places. But and then we're finished.
And Barbara, we do all this electronically now, don't we? We send, at least my last one, I know I sent emails and followed it up with hard copy, but
Right. Yes.
it's all emails.
Right.
For effect if we move that way eventually.
Right. Yeah. Emails with follow-up with hard copy. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
And then usually what I do as site team chair, the Wayne Mayberry, who'd be the chair of the commission, you send you tell Wayne that you got all your materials ready, or that you're going to need a national reviewer. And he tells you, he sends back to you who the national reviewer is. And I pack everything up in their binders and then put things in the front and the back. Remember those things we signed about those confidentiality agreements? Those go in there and so on, and site visit report 1 and part 2 and so on. I put it all together. I usually put a cover memo with it saying, thank you for doing your work, and this is what's here, and that's it.
Question about that. As sort of site team chair, or I would be designated a member of the commission.
Nope,
No,
nope, you're not a member of the commission.
no, I'm not a member. I know that,
Yeah.
but I would be designated to send the materials to a member of the commission when I'm done.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, actually, this is Wayne. You'd be in touch with me, and I'll find the commissioner to do the review, and then I'll let you know which one to forward the materials to.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. So there's one specific person that will get our report, the center's response, our report to part 2, and then they will review that.
Right.
Yes, that's right.
And all the materials.
What was that, Mark?
All of the materials also.
Right, yes.
That's right. Yeah, it'd be the materials you receive from the center as well as the part 1 report, the
And
center's the part 2 report.
Okay. Very good. And then one other question about that piece, and this has been sort of confusing to me. Does the accreditation, the person that I send it to who's on the commission, can they then contact the center and ask for other documentations and things like that?
Absolutely. If the commissioner who reviews it sees something they think the site team missed, or if there's something they still have a question about, they can contact the center. And I think the hope would be that in contacting the center, they could help the center set things right if they're out of compliance in some way. So
Okay.
it's yet one more level of review, which is designed to really help the center be in compliance.
Very good. Question. So I wonder if it would be helpful if the site team chair was looped into some of that conversation. Your thoughts about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, that's a kind of question where usually the commissioner who does the review, they would contact the site team chair if they have questions.
Great.
They'd be back in touch with all of you.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Any other questions? Because we're right at our hour. And Wayne, did you have anything, or did I say anything that wasn't the way it's supposed to be?
No, ma'am. I think it was one very good presentation. Thank you. I've got to hang up to go catch my plane, but I appreciate, Barbara, you taking the time to prepare for today and you've done a lot of preparation, I know. And Mark, thank you for setting up the time for us all to talk. And thanks to the rest of you for Bob and Mark and Eric for joining in the conversation and for being willing to serve.
Thank you.
Travels.
But I'm going to hang up and let you all say goodbye to each other.
Okay.
All
See
right.
you.
Thanks,
Bye.
Wayne.
Bye-bye.
In Washington.
And I want to say thanks too to Mark Medwed for setting this up, and to the rest of you. And I really welcome you as National Site Team Chair. I think it's fun, frankly. It's work. And if you get